During the years of the Trump administration, the United States was going through a time of strong discussions about the country's future, especially about national security and immigration. People across the nation had different opinions about how the government should protect the borders and who should be allowed to live in the country. Some believed the country needed stronger rules to stay safe, while others felt that compassion, understanding, and careful review were most important. In the middle of these debates, the Department of Homeland Security, often called DHS, had a very important role. It was their responsibility to watch over the nation's borders, airports, and many areas related to safety and security. DHS itself was a large organization, created after the events of 2001, to make sure the country was prepared for threats. Over time, the department expanded into many branches, such as U.S. Customs and Border Protection, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and others responsible for airport screening and emergency situations. With so many different tasks, DHS influenced the lives of both citizens and non-citizens. This made the department highly visible in the news, especially when new policies were announced or when actions were taken that affected families, travelers, or communities near the border. As the Trump administration continued, immigration became one of the most discussed topics in political debates. Television interviews, online posts, public speeches, and social conversations. Supporters of stronger border security believed that doing so would protect the country from crime, illegal activities, and threats from outside forces. They felt that strict order was necessary to preserve safety and fairness. On the other hand, critics thought that some immigration policies could be too harsh, causing stress, separation, or fear among families who were trying to build a better life. Communities, families, and legal experts often shared emotional stories and personal experiences, which made the entire topic feel even more personal. Every time DHS made a new statement or changed a rule, the public reacted strongly. In some places, large gatherings formed to express support. In others, groups came together to raise concerns. The debate did not stay only in news studios or government buildings. It traveled into classrooms, workplaces, and homes. People spoke about it with their friends, relatives, co-workers, and even strangers online. Everyone seemed to have something to say because the topic connected to deeper questions. What does it mean to belong? What should a country protect? How should fairness be defined? Even though different people had different viewpoints, almost everyone agreed that the conversation was important. It was not just about laws, but about values and identity. However, when public discussions grow intense, misunderstandings can happen. Some statements were emotional. Some were based on personal experience. Some were influenced by media sources with their own perspectives. Because of this, conversations sometimes became more heated than helpful. Still, beneath all of the talk, the central focus remained on DHS and how it chose to carry out its duties. As this atmosphere continued, many organizations, lawyers, and community groups began to observe DHS activities more closely. They wanted to understand how certain decisions were made, how procedures were followed, and how policies were affecting families and individuals. Some groups spoke with people who felt impacted by DHS actions, trying to gather meaningful information about their experiences. Others studied public records and official documents to better understand the situation from a factual point of view. During this period, journalists also played a role. News reporters traveled to border towns, airports, government buildings, and community centers to talk with people and gather details for their stories. They interviewed government officials, attorneys, local leaders, families, and advocates. Their goal was to explain what was happening to the general public so that people could form their own opinions. Meanwhile, DHS continued to present its perspective clearly. Leaders and spokespersons explained that the organization was committed to national security and that its operations were designed to keep the country safe. They stated that decisions made by the department were based on legal authority and responsibility. Many officials working within DHS saw themselves as individuals with difficult jobs, trying their best to perform duties that involved careful judgment and responsibility. Some of them came forward to speak about the challenges of balancing national safety with compassion, fairness, and human understanding. Despite these explanations, discussions in the public did not calm down. Some people believed that certain actions taken by DHS needed deeper review to make sure they were aligned with federal law and the Constitution. Others felt that the critics were misunderstanding the purpose of DHS or not seeing the full picture. This difference of opinion continued to grow, which made the national conversation even more significant. At the same time, families and individuals affected by policies shared stories about how these experiences influenced their daily lives. Some stories involved long waits, complicated paperwork, or uncertainty about the future. Others described emotional stress, confusion, or difficulty accessing information. These personal accounts made the situation even more relatable and real to many. Listeners and readers, community groups, and legal organizations took note of these stories and began discussing ways to address concerns in a peaceful and lawful manner. Many of them believed that the best way to protect rights and responsibilities in a democratic system is through the legal process. Therefore, they began to organize meetings, gather information, and prepare formal approaches to express their concerns in court. This is how the environment slowly reached a turning point. On one side, DHS continued to emphasize its duty to safeguard the country. On the other side, a growing number of legal advocates and civil rights supporters felt that certain actions should be reviewed by the courts. Both sides believed they were acting out of responsibility and principle. The discussions were not only about policies but also about respect, fairness, law, and national identity. By the time the situation reached the point where a major legal challenge was ready to be filed, the public was already deeply aware of the issue. Some followed the updates closely through newspapers and online articles. Others discussed it casually with family or coworkers. Many felt that whatever happened next would become an important moment in the history of national policy and government authority. This period, filled with discussion and reflection, set the stage for the large lawsuit that would soon draw national attention. It was not just a legal matter, but a moment that highlighted how beliefs, values, and government decisions can shape the direction of a country. It showed how conversations about security, fairness, and identity are always evolving, always being examined, and always influencing how society grows. As public discussions continued across the country, different groups of people began paying closer attention to how the Department of Homeland Security was carrying out its duties. For many of these individuals, their goal was not to criticize or blame. Instead, they wanted to understand what was happening, how decisions were being made, and how those decisions were affecting everyday lives. Some of them were lawyers, some were volunteers, and some were simply community members who cared about fairness and clarity. These groups started by gathering information. They spoke to families, travelers, students, workers, and others who had interacted with DHS or had experiences with the immigration system. Many of the conversations took place in community centers, local offices, church halls, or even in quiet living rooms. People shared stories about their experiences, describing situations with honesty and detail. Some accounts were filled with confusion or frustration. Others held feelings of uncertainty and anticipation. Everyone who spoke hoped that by sharing, they could help bring understanding to a very complex situation. As these stories were collected, the legal teams listened carefully. They wrote down the details, compared similarities, and looked for patterns. Their purpose was to see if there were any issues that needed further review according to the law. These lawyers understood that in a democratic society, government agencies operate with authority, but that authority must always remain balanced with respect for individual rights. So they moved slowly and thoughtfully, making sure that the information they gathered was accurate and responsibly organized. At the same time, many of these teams reviewed public documents. They read official policy statements, procedural guidelines, and government publications. They watched public interviews, press conferences, and hearings, where DHS officials spoke about their mission and their focus on national safety. The lawyers also studied past court cases involving government agencies to better understand how the law had been interpreted in similar situations before. Their work required patience, research, and careful attention. The groups involved included national legal organizations, local advocacy centers, university law clinics, and civil rights groups. Some of the lawyers had years of experience with immigration law, while others specialized in constitutional issues. Despite different backgrounds, they shared a common belief that every situation should be examined with fairness. They often reminded themselves and others that no one should rush to conclusions. Instead, they focused on facts, documents, timelines, and personal statements, always seeking clarity before taking any step forward. Meanwhile, DHS continued to speak openly about its purpose and responsibilities. Officials emphasized that the department was focused on national protection and lawful administration. They explained that many decisions made by officers and administrators were based on complex rules, regulations, and national security assessments. DHS representatives expressed that carrying out these tasks required seriousness and dedication, and they believed that their policies were designed in the interest of public safety. Their responses remained consistent. The organization viewed its work as part of its duty to the nation. However, as the legal groups gathered more accounts, they began to see questions emerging. These questions were not accusations. They were careful inquiries meant to understand whether some policies or practices might have effects that needed review. For example, they wondered whether all procedures were being carried out consistently in every region. They also asked whether individuals going through immigration processes clearly understood their rights and responsibilities. These were thoughtful questions intended to strengthen understanding. In several cities, small meetings were held where lawyers, researchers, and community representatives discussed their findings. The atmosphere in these meetings was usually calm and professional. Charts, documents, and notes were spread across tables. Participants reviewed one example at a time, making sure not to overlook any detail. If something was unclear, they paused and went back to the original record. If they needed more information, they reached out to gather it. Every step was handled with patience and caution. Slowly, the information collected began to form a clearer picture. It appeared that some members of the public had experienced confusion or difficulty during immigration or border processes. Some felt that instructions had not been explained clearly. Others felt uncertain about what steps to follow next. The legal teams recognized that these situations did not necessarily mean wrongdoing. However, they believed that such concerns should be examined carefully to ensure transparency and fairness. Over time, discussions among legal groups turned toward how to address these concerns in a structured and respectful way. They talked about different options. Some suggested writing letters to DHS requesting clarification. Others suggested asking lawmakers to review certain policies. And some believed that the most organized method would be to present the information in a legal case, which would allow the situation to be considered by a court. In the legal system, courts are designed to examine facts, listen to both sides, and make decisions based on the law. This process is one of the ways democracy maintains balance between government authority and individual rights. After months of reviewing documents, speaking with individuals, studying legal precedents, and consulting with experts, the coalition of legal groups gradually moved toward the idea of filing a lawsuit. The decision was not made quickly or easily. Before finalizing any step, they discussed the potential impact such a lawsuit could have. They thought about the communities involved, the government agencies involved, and the larger public conversation. They wanted to approach everything with respect and responsibility. When they finally agreed to proceed, they began drafting the legal documents. This involved writing a detailed explanation of their concerns, supported by evidence and statements from individuals who had shared their experiences. The document clearly explained that the lawsuit was not meant to create conflict, but to request review and clarification through the proper legal channels. As the announcement of the upcoming lawsuit approached, the topic drew attention from media organizations. Reporters reached out to learn more about the reasons behind the legal action. They interviewed lawyers who spoke calmly about their intentions, explaining that the purpose was to ensure fairness and clarity in the application of policies. The lawyers emphasized that this was a standard part of how the legal system works. When questions arise, the courts are there to consider them. Meanwhile, DHS prepared its own responses. Officials explained that the department stood by its procedures and that it operated within the law. They expressed confidence in their work and made statements reaffirming their commitment to national security and lawful enforcement. They indicated that they were prepared to address the legal challenge through proper legal representation. As news spread, public reactions varied. Some people welcomed the lawsuit, feeling that review could help answer important questions. Others felt that DHS was already doing its job and believed the lawsuit might slow down necessary work. Many people simply waited to see what would happen next, understanding that the court system allows for careful examination before any decision is made. This stage of the story reflected a moment of thoughtful consideration. It showed how, in a large and diverse country, different viewpoints can come together through structured processes. It demonstrated how democratic systems encourage dialogue, review, and balance. No matter which side a person supported, the situation reminded everyone that the law exists not just to guide government actions, but also to ensure that citizens have a peaceful way to express concerns. The filing of the lawsuit did not immediately resolve anything. Instead, it opened the next chapter in which both sides would present their explanations, share evidence, and answer questions in front of a judge. It marked the beginning of a legal journey that could influence how similar policies might be understood or shaped in the future. And as the lawsuit moved forward, the entire nation watched closely, knowing that the outcome would matter not just for the people involved, but for the discussion of fairness, responsibility, and the role of government in the lives of the public. Once the lawsuit was officially filed, the story quickly spread beyond the communities, legal groups, and small discussion circles where it had first taken shape. It reached television screens, newspapers, radio broadcasts, and online platforms across the country. People who had not followed earlier developments now began paying attention. The news described it as a significant legal challenge that could influence national policy. It was not just a local matter anymore. It had become part of a national conversation. Major news networks reported the story with different tones and perspectives. Some news anchors spoke about the lawsuit with great seriousness, highlighting its possible effects on how government agencies operate. They interviewed legal experts who explained what the case could mean. These experts used calm and careful language, comparing this lawsuit to other well-known legal cases from the past. Their goal was to help the public understand that this was a formal, structured procedure, not a sudden or chaotic event. Other news channels focused on how the lawsuit reflected broader public discussions about immigration and security. They invited commentators who shared their views, some praising the lawsuit as a responsible step, others questioning whether it was necessary. The variation in viewpoints showed how complex the subject was. No single voice could represent every perspective. This diversity of opinion made the story even more interesting and encouraged people to think deeply. On social media, the situation spread even faster. Messages, posts, and discussions appeared on many platforms. Some users talked about personal experiences they or someone they knew had gone through. Others simply shared their thoughts or reposted articles. In some places, conversations were thoughtful and respectful, while in others, the emotional nature of the topic led to misunderstandings. But despite the differences in tone, one thing was clear: people cared. The issue touched many aspects of life, values, identity, and the meaning of belonging. Meanwhile, politicians also began to comment on the situation. Some stated publicly that the lawsuit was necessary to review policy effectiveness. They explained that the legal system exists to help maintain balance and accountability. Others expressed concern that the lawsuit might disrupt ongoing work connected to national safety. Both sides spoke confidently, and their statements were covered widely in the media. These public remarks added another layer to the already growing conversation. As public interest increased, DHS continued to share its perspective. Officials gave interviews and released written statements. They explained that the department had responsibilities defined by law, and that it was committed to fulfilling those responsibilities with professionalism. DHS emphasized that its policies were created to maintain national safety, and that it worked carefully to apply the law in a fair and structured manner. Many employees within DHS were also aware of the situation. For many of them, their work was simply their daily job, something they took seriously and approached with dedication. Some of these workers discussed the lawsuit among themselves during breaks or quiet moments. They wondered how long the legal process might take and what kind of questions the courts would ask. Even though they were not involved directly in the lawsuit, they understood that its outcome could shape how their work was guided in the future. Journalists continued to gather information. They traveled to border towns, city offices, court buildings, and neighborhoods to speak with people affected by the policies or concerned about them. Reporters also attended press conferences where lawyers explained the purpose of the lawsuit. These lawyers spoke calmly, stating once again that their goal was clarity and review, not conflict. They emphasized that the lawsuit was part of a democratic system that encourages fairness and discussion. The scene outside the courthouse became a reflection of the broader national conversation. Sometimes groups of supporters or concerned individuals gathered peacefully to show encouragement or raise questions. They held signs with clear messages such as "Clarity matters," "Fairness for all," or "Respect the process." Their presence was calm and organized, demonstrating the value of peaceful civic participation. Inside the courthouse, the legal process began. Lawyers from both sides prepared their arguments, evidence, and supporting documents. This stage of the process required patience and detail. Legal teams spent long hours reviewing statements, checking information, and preparing responses to possible questions. The courtroom environment was quiet and respectful. Judges, lawyers, and clerks performed their tasks according to rules and tradition, ensuring that every step was carried out with seriousness and care. The court listened to the arguments presented. The lawyers representing the individuals and organizations who filed the lawsuit explained the experiences and circumstances that led to their concerns. They shared documents, statements, and expert explanations. Their tone remained focused and respectful, reflecting their commitment to the fairness of the process. On the other side, lawyers representing DHS calmly explained the reasons behind the policies, the legal authority under which they operated, and the goals the department aimed to fulfill. They spoke about the complexities of national safety, the importance of lawful procedure, and the need to make decisions based on thoughtful assessment. They expressed confidence that the department had acted within its responsibilities. The judge listened carefully to both sides, asked questions when needed, and took notes. Judges are trained to stay neutral and thoughtful, and this case was no exception. The courtroom environment encouraged attentiveness and fairness. Proceedings moved at a steady pace, respecting the importance of detail. During this time, the public continued to follow updates closely. Newspapers published summaries of the hearings. Radio hosts discussed the day's developments, and online writers posted analyses. Some people read every new detail, while others checked occasionally just to stay informed. Many understood that the legal process would take time. Court cases, especially important ones, often move slowly, allowing space for careful review. Around the country, conversations continued in schools, workplaces, homes, and community spaces. Teachers discussed the issue in classrooms, using it to help students learn about how the legal system functions. Families talked about the case while eating dinner, sharing what they heard and how they felt. Coworkers discussed it during breaks. These conversations showed how deeply the story had become part of daily life. One of the most notable effects of this stage was that many people began learning more about how laws and government systems work. The lawsuit encouraged curiosity. People researched how DHS was structured, what different departments were responsible for, how immigration processes function, and how court cases influence national policy. This learning was valuable because understanding helps reduce confusion and encourages thoughtful participation in civic life. Meanwhile, the individuals who had contributed their stories to the lawsuit remained hopeful. Some of them followed the updates closely, while others waited quietly, trusting that the legal system would take its course. For many, simply being heard through the legal process brought a sense of dignity and acknowledgement. They felt that their experiences were not forgotten, and that their voices had helped start a meaningful conversation. At the same time, DHS employees and officials continued their daily duties. Airports remained busy, border checkpoints continued to operate, and paperwork and processing continued. The work of the department did not stop just because a lawsuit was in progress. The organization continued to function, showing that government responsibilities carry on even during legal review. This period, when the lawsuit first reached national attention and entered the courtroom, represented a moment of reflection for the country. It showed how a democratic system allows concerns to be raised peacefully and respectfully. It demonstrated that governments and citizens can engage in dialogue through structured processes rather than conflict. And it reminded everyone that large issues are often made up of individual experiences, real human lives, emotions, challenges, and hopes. Part 3 reflects the point where the story shifted from quiet concerns to a national discussion supported by legal action, media coverage, and public attention. It marked the moment when the country began watching closely, knowing that whatever happened next would influence both policy and public understanding.